The last time I felt truly safe was about 5 years ago, before I moved into that apartment. I was in my late 20s, living alone for the first time, in a small ground floor place at the end of a ridiculously quiet street. It was the kind of street where you knew all the neighbors by the type of dog they walked, and the loudest sound was the distant rumble of the subway. My life was pretty simple back then. I worked from home as a freelance graphic designer, and my biggest social event of the week was usually a trip to the local coffee shop. The apartment itself was nothing special, a one-bedroom with a tiny kitchen and a living room that opened up onto a small, dusty yard. The only thing I really loved about it was the big window in the living room, which let in this soft, golden light in the evenings. Even though the curtains were so thin, you could practically see right through them. That window was my favorite thing until it became the source of my worst nightmare. It was a Tuesday evening, a little after 8 p.m., and I was on the couch, half watching some cheesy reality show and half scrolling through my phone. The air was warm and still, and the only light in the room was the pale glow from the TV and my phone screen. I was in that comfortable, lazy state you get into after a long day, just completely unwound. That's when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. My heart didn't even skip a beat at first. I just assumed it was a wrong number or a spam message. But when I opened it, there was no text, just an image. The photo was dark and grainy, but I could make out my living room, the ugly floral pattern of my couch, the messy pile of blankets, and the soft light from the TV. In the middle of it all, there I was, a blurry shape staring at my phone. It was a photo of me, taken through the sheer curtains of my living room window. A cold dread, sharp and instant, shot through me, making every muscle tense up. I dropped my phone on the couch, my breath catching in my throat, and I slowly turned my head to look at the window, the flimsy curtains moving slightly in a non-existent breeze. I was completely frozen. My first thought, the one I desperately clung to, was that it was a prank. A sick, messed up joke by some bored teenager or one of the guys from the coffee shop I'd awkwardly flirted with once. I stood up, my legs feeling like lead, and yanked the curtains shut with a force that made the cheap rod rattle. The fabric, now a solid barrier between me and the outside world, did little to soothe the frantic pounding in my chest. I stared at my reflection in the dark glass, seeing a wide-eyed stranger with a pale face. My mind was racing, trying to come up with a logical explanation. Maybe someone had seen me through the window and just snapped a quick photo. Yeah, that was it. It was weird, but not necessarily dangerous. I tried to convince myself, to rationalize away the knot of fear tightening in my stomach. I even turned the TV volume up, a pointless attempt to drown out the silence that now felt heavy and threatening. That I sat back down on the couch, my phone still on the cushion where I had dropped it. For a few minutes, nothing happened. The silence stretched on, and I started to feel a tiny bit of relief. Okay, I whispered to myself, it's over. But then, just as I was about to reach for the remote, my phone buzzed again. My heart lurched, and I snatched it up, my fingers shaking so much I almost dropped it again. Another text, another unknown number, and another photo. This one was different. It was a close-up shot of my kitchen window, the flimsy blinds slightly parted, and through the gap, you could just make out the top of my head and my shoulder as I was on the couch, facing away from the kitchen. This photo was taken from a different angle, a different window, and it was taken after I had closed the living room curtains. The realization hit me like a physical blow. They were still out there. They were moving around my apartment, watching me from every angle, and they were still sending me the proof that a new wave of panic, hotter and more intense, washed over me. I felt like a trapped animal. The sheer curtains on my bedroom window, which I always left slightly ajar for the morning light, suddenly felt like an open invitation. I grabbed my phone, my hands shaking so violently I could barely type. I called the police. My voice was a choked whisper as I tried to explain what was happening, the words tumbling out in a frantic, incoherent rush. The operator, a woman with a calm, steady voice, listened patiently. She asked me to describe the photos in my apartment. I remember her asking if I had any enemies, if I knew anyone who might be playing a cruel joke. I couldn't think of a single person. My life was painfully boring. As I was talking to her, I was pacing back and forth in the middle of the living room, a place I now realized was completely exposed, a stage for some twisted show. The sound of my phone buzzing again made me jump. Another photo. This one, a close-up of the tiny gap in my bedroom blinds. a sliver of darkness where a thin, pale curtain was just visible. It was a terrifying confirmation. They had been at my bedroom window. They had walked all the way around my apartment, from the living room to the kitchen, and now to my bedroom, and I hadn't heard a single thing. The silence outside was no longer peaceful. It was heavy with menace. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, a frantic drumbeat against the silence. I stopped pacing and stood perfectly still in the center of the room, my eyes darting between the windows, the blinds, and the solid front door. I felt a chill creep up my spine, a feeling that went beyond fear. It was the absolute, gut-wrenching certainty of being watched, not just from the outside, but from somewhere closer, somewhere inside. I was on the phone with the police, whispering, "They're still sending photos," my voice trembling. The operator was saying something, but her words were a distant hum. That's when my screen lit up with the final image, and then my phone buzzed again, a low vibration that felt like it was rattling my very bones. I didn't want to look. I squeezed my eyes shut, my forehead pressed against the cold glass of the window, still holding the phone to my ear as the police operator tried to talk me down. But the screen flashed, the light illuminating the dark room, and I couldn't resist. I ripped the phone from my ear and stared at the new image, and for a second, I didn't understand what I was seeing. It was a photo of the apartment, and there I was, in the center of the frame, my back to the camera, talking on the phone. My body was frozen, but my mind was screaming. The photo was taken from inside my living room, just a few feet behind me, the blurry outline of the bookshelf and the couch clearly visible in the foreground. I could even see the frizzy mess of my ponytail, the one I had tied up without a second thought that morning. But the detail that made my blood run cold, that turned the terror from a cold dread into a full-body, mind-breaking certainty, was the pale, almost translucent shape of a hand in the bottom right corner of the picture, resting on the back of the couch, right beside my shoulder. The police operator's voice was a distant, muffled sound as I stood there, frozen in time, staring at the screen. The reality of the photo was so immense, so impossible, it almost felt like a hallucination. There was no way. It couldn't be real. I had locked the door. I had checked the windows. I had been pacing, talking, making noise. How could someone have been in here the entire time, silent as a ghost? The silence that followed the buzzing of the phone was absolute, suffocating. The TV was still on, but I couldn't hear it. The air in the room, which had been warm and still, now felt like a suffocating pressure on my chest. I slowly, agonizingly, began to turn around, my entire body screaming at me not to just run, to do anything but look. But I had to. I had to see. My neck muscles were so tight they ached, and my eyes darted into the shadows, the corners of the room, behind the couch, everywhere a person could hide. There was nothing, just the familiar objects of my home, now imbued with a sinister, alien presence. I was alone, but I had never felt less safe that I don't remember what the police operator was saying. Her voice became a static buzz, a useless sound that couldn't protect me. My mind, which had been racing with frantic thoughts just minutes before, went completely blank. All I could feel was the terrifying certainty that I was not alone. Every shadow in my small apartment stretched into a monstrous shape. The quiet hum of the refrigerator became a menacing growl. My eyes scanned the room again, and this time, my gaze settled on the flimsy, wicker bookshelf in the corner. I had always thought it was a charming, boho chic piece, but now I saw a perfect hiding spot for a person to squat behind, unseen. A cold sweat broke out on my back as I thought about how easy it would be to just stay completely still, completely silent, in my tiny, cluttered apartment. I had to move. I had to do something. My phone, still open to the horrifying image, slipped from my numb fingers and clattered to the floor, the screen cracking in a spiderweb pattern. That sound, the small, sharp crack of glass on linoleum, was the only thing that broke the silence. And it was enough. As soon as it echoed, I heard it, a faint, almost imperceptible whisper of air from the hallway that led to my bedroom. It was the sound of a door being gently, slowly pushed open. I hadn't noticed it before, but the door to my bedroom, which I always kept tightly shut, was now ajar, a sliver of darkness where a person could easily be standing. It was a confirmation of my worst fears, a silent, mocking acknowledgement of my panic. The person wasn't just in my apartment, they were waiting. They were toying with me. I didn't think about grabbing a coat, my keys, or my purse. The need to escape, to get out of that apartment and away from whatever was inside, was the only thing that mattered. I took one panicked look at the front door, the solid wood of it now a beacon of hope in the suffocating darkness, and I ran. I didn't look back. I just ran as fast as my shaking legs could carry me, through the living room, past the couch, and toward the front door that my fingers fumbled with the deadbolt, the cold metal of the lock a stark contrast to the burning heat in my cheeks. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely align the key, and every second felt like a lifetime. The police operator, who I had completely forgotten about, was still on the line, her frantic questions now a background noise to the frantic pounding of my heart. I could feel the invisible presence in my apartment, a physical weight in the air just behind me, and I was terrified to turn around. With a final, desperate twist, the lock clicked open, and I threw the door open, practically falling out onto the dark, quiet street. The cool night air hit my face, a jarring but welcome sensation after the suffocating atmosphere of my apartment. I didn't stop to catch my breath. I ran, blindly, down the street, my mind a blank slate of pure, unadulterated fear, my bare feet slapping against the cold pavement. The little noises of the night, the rustling leaves, the distant hum of a car, felt like a symphony of comfort compared to the absolute silence I had just left behind. I ended up at a small, 24-hour convenience store a few blocks away. My phone, with its shattered screen, was still clutched in my hand. I used the store's phone to call the police again, my voice a broken, hysterical mess. They sent an officer over. They went into the apartment, with me standing outside, shivering and watching from the corner of the street. They came out about 15 minutes later, telling me there was nothing. No signs of forced entry. No one was there. The photos on my phone, they said, could have been a joke, a bizarre prank, or an app. But I knew. I knew what I saw, and I knew what I felt. The hand on the back of the couch was real, and the fear was real. I never went back inside that apartment. I stayed with a friend that night, and the next day, I had a moving company get my things. I still have the photos on a backed-up hard drive, even though I've changed my number and moved to a new city. Every night, before I go to sleep, I double-check my locks and make sure my curtains are completely shut. I don't know who was in my apartment or why they chose me, but the thought that they could still be out there, watching, is a feeling that will never truly go away. I remember it all too clearly, every single detail etched in my mind like a scar. It was about 5 years ago, I think. I was a bachelor living alone in a quiet, suburban neighborhood, the kind of place where nothing ever really happened. My life was pretty simple back then, almost mundane. I worked a late shift as a stocker at a big box store, so I'd usually get home around 2:30 a.m. The street would be completely deserted, just me and my beat-up Ford, and a few crickets chirping in the humid summer air. It was a peaceful routine, one that I actually came to appreciate. The quietness of the night felt like a private, secret world just for me, a stark contrast to the endless chaos of my job. I'd walk from my car to the front door, the jingle of my keys the only sound breaking the silence, and for a long time, that was all there was. It was a comfort, a predictable rhythm in a life that was otherwise pretty unremarkable. Then, one night, the rhythm got a new beat. A sour note. I was pulling into my driveway, the headlights of my car illuminating the street, and that's when I first saw it. A dark sedan, just sitting there. It was parked across the street, a few houses down, right under the sickly yellow glow of a street lamp. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe a neighbor had a visitor, or someone was having car trouble. I just locked my car and went inside, the image of the car a fleeting thought in my mind. But the next night, there it was again. The same spot, the same time, 3 a.m. exactly. I couldn't make out the make or model. The darkness and the distance made it a vague shape, a phantom on my street. I tried to convince myself it was a coincidence, just a weird pattern that my sleep-deprived mind was picking up on. But deep down, a tiny little knot of unease started to form in my stomach, a cold feeling I couldn't shake. I kept my eyes on it as I walked to my door, my pace just a little faster than usual. That's how it started. A new, unwanted ritual. Every night, without fail, I'd get home, and there it would be. Same time, same place. My head would be pounding with exhaustion, my body aching from lifting heavy boxes all night. But all I could focus on was that car. I started noticing things, little details that only someone who was looking for them would catch. The car wasn't new. It had seen better days. It was a nondescript, dark-colored sedan, the kind that blends into a parking lot perfectly, but under that street lamp, it became a looming, sinister silhouette. The back bumper had a noticeable dent, a deep scuff mark that looked like it had been in a fender bender. And on the trunk, a sticker, faded and peeling, depicting some kind of cartoon devil with a pitchfork, laughing. It was so weirdly specific, so out of place. But the strangest thing was the stillness. It never moved. The engine was always off, the headlights dark, and I never saw anyone inside. It was a hollow shell, a mechanical ghost haunting my street at night. That my routine changed. The comforting walk from my car to my door became a nerve-wracking dash. I'd fumble with my keys, my heart hammering in my chest, my eyes darting back to that car. I'd rush inside, slam the door, and lock it, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. My peaceful nights were gone, replaced by a constant, low-level dread. I started pulling back the blinds of my bedroom window just to peek at it, a morbid curiosity taking hold of me. I'd watch the car from the safety of my home, a silent standoff between me and this mysterious vehicle. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe someone was a new hire at the store I worked at, and they lived down the street. Maybe they had a weird schedule. But the gut feeling, that cold knot of fear, told me otherwise. The car felt like it was watching me, an inanimate object with a predatory gaze, and I was the prey. It was a suffocating, terrifying feeling, and I was completely alone with it that I couldn't live like that anymore. The fear had started to seep into every part of my life. Sleep became a luxury, a constant battle against the image of that car lurking outside my window. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding, convinced I could hear a car door slam or a faint engine rumble. My exhaustion was becoming dangerous. I'd find myself zoning out at work, almost dropping heavy boxes, my mind fixated on what was waiting for me at home. I tried to tell myself it was just a coincidence, a person on a strange schedule, but that didn't explain the eerie silence, the lack of movement, the way it just sat there. The sheer persistence of it was what got to me. Day after day, it was the same story, a dark, silent judgment waiting for me every single night. The feeling of being watched was unbearable, a constant weight on my shoulders that I just couldn't shake. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that it was there for me. And the curiosity, mixed with the terror, finally became too much to bear. One night, I decided I had to do something. I couldn't just keep running and hiding in my house. I needed to get a closer look to confirm what my gut was telling me. I waited until about 2:55 a.m., just minutes before the car's scheduled arrival. My heart was a drum in my chest, a frantic rhythm that echoed in my ears. I slipped out the front door as quietly as I could, my feet bare against the cool concrete of the porch. I crouched down behind a large, overgrown lilac bush near the edge of my driveway, the leaves scratching against my skin. The air was thick and heavy, smelling of damp soil and cut grass. The street was silent, a suffocating silence that made every tiny sound, a rustle of leaves, a far-off dog barking, feel amplified and menacing. And then, right on cue, I heard it, the soft, distant hum of an engine. A pair of headlights rounded the corner, slow and deliberate, and the car rolled to a stop in its usual spot across the street. I held my breath, my body tensed and ready to bolt, my eyes locked on the dark shape. A phantom in the night that my heart was a frantic bird trapped in a cage, fluttering against my ribs as I peered out from behind the bush. The car was even more unsettling up close. The street lamp's light barely touched its surface, and it seemed to absorb the light, making it a darker void in the night. I could see the faded bumper sticker with the cartoon devil more clearly now, the colors worn away by years of sun and rain, a ghostly image grinning back at me. The dent in the rear bumper was jagged and deep, as if it had been hit by something big, a signature mark. The windows were heavily tinted, black voids that offered no glimpse into the interior. I strained my eyes, trying to see if there was even a silhouette of a person, a faint reflection, anything. But there was nothing, just the thick, impenetrable darkness of the tinted glass. The car sat there, an unnatural monument of stillness, a silent predator waiting. The sheer lack of movement was what really got to me. The way it just existed in the quiet night, completely lifeless, completely motionless. It was a terrifying absence of presence that a cold sweat broke out on my back, but I knew I had to push it. I had to know. I took a deep breath, the damp night air filling my lungs, and pushed myself up from behind the bush, my bare feet making a soft, almost imperceptible sound on the grass. I stood there for a moment, an open target under the pale street lamp, the cold knot in my stomach tightening with every passing second. I took one hesitant step towards the car, a silent challenge in the dead of night. My shadow stretched out in front of me, long and distorted. It was like I had broken some kind of invisible rule, shattered the silence of a secret pact. The moment my foot landed on the asphalt, the car's engine roared to life, a sudden, guttural sound that shattered the stillness. The tires screeched in protest, leaving a thick, black stripe on the street as it shot forward, the dark shape accelerating down the road and disappearing around the corner in a matter of seconds. I was left standing there, adrenaline coursing through my veins, my heart a frantic drumbeat against my ribs, and the smell of burning rubber hanging heavy in the air that I stood there for what felt like an eternity, the silence of the street pressing in on me, heavier than before. The smell of burning rubber clung to the humid air, a nauseating perfume of fear. My heart was still pounding, but it was now a hollow, exhausted thumping, like a drum being beaten in an empty room. A part of me felt a wave of immense relief, the kind you feel after a near miss, a moment of pure, unadulterated, thank God it's gone. But that relief was quickly overshadowed by a deep, gnawing terror. The car hadn't just driven off, it had fled. As soon as I took a step, it was gone, like it was a living thing that I had spooked. I rushed back inside, slamming and locking the door behind me, leaning against it as if my own body could hold off whatever was out there. The house, my sanctuary, suddenly felt exposed, fragile. I didn't sleep a wink that night, the image of that black car screaming away on the pavement replaying in my mind on a loop. My mind was a whirlwind of questions, but I had no answers. The first rays of morning light felt like a slap in the face. I was completely drained, my eyes burning, my body aching, but I couldn't rest. I needed to see if it had been real, if I hadn't just imagined the whole thing in a sleep-deprived daze. I walked out onto my porch, the morning sun already baking the dew off the lawn. The street was alive with the mundane sounds of a new day, a bird singing, a car driving by, a neighbor's sprinkler kicking on. But then I saw it. Right on the asphalt across the street, a long, thick black line, a physical mark of the screeching tires, a trail of evidence. I followed the line with my eyes, and my blood ran cold. The tire marks didn't just end. They curved, abruptly, a second, smaller set of marks leading right into my driveway. And there, on the hood of my Ford, glistening with morning dew, was a pristine white envelope. My stomach dropped to my feet. I could see the fresh, dark mud from the tires on the asphalt, a path leading directly to my car that I felt a cold dread wash over me, more profound than any fear I'd experienced the night before. The sight of that envelope, a small, innocent-looking rectangle of paper sitting on my car hood, felt like a profound violation. It was an impossible thing, a physical manifestation of the silent, unseen eyes that had been watching me all along. The muddy tire marks snaked across the concrete, a direct line from the street to my personal space, a line that should never have been crossed. My hands were shaking as I walked toward it, my mind screaming at me to leave it alone, to call the cops, to just run away. But I couldn't. I had to know. I had to rip off the bandage. The envelope was sealed, but there was no name, no address, no return stamp, nothing. Just a stark, menacing blankness that somehow made it even more terrifying. My fingers trembled as I lifted the flap, the paper making a tiny, crisp sound in the still morning air. Inside, there was a single, folded piece of paper. It wasn't a letter. It was just one line, written in neat, block letters, the kind of handwriting that's deliberately trying to be anonymous. I stared at the words, and the bottom fell out of my stomach. Every single hair on my body stood on end, and a shiver of pure, primal terror shot down my spine. It didn't say, "I'm watching you." It didn't say, "Don't mess with me." It was something far, far worse. The message was intimate, personal, and bone-chillingly specific. "You look handsome when you sleep." I dropped the paper and stumbled back, my mind reeling. It meant they weren't just watching my house. They were watching me inside my house. It wasn't about the car or the street or some weird game. It was about me, specifically. My sleep, my life, my private moments. The car wasn't a random coincidence. It was a stakeout. I felt like a ghost had just walked through me, leaving behind a cold emptiness where my sense of safety used to be. I knew, in that moment, that my life would never, ever be the same again. My quiet, mundane life was over. I immediately called the police, but I also knew, with a certainty that still haunts me, that I'd never sleep soundly in that house again. Man, I've been reading a lot of these posts lately, and it's about time I shared my own story. This happened a few years ago when I was 17, just a junior in high school, living a totally normal suburban life. My biggest problem was figuring out what to wear to a party or how to ace a history test. My bedroom was on the second floor, which I loved because it felt like my own private world. I spent most of my time there, either doing homework or just staring out the window at the quiet street below. Everything felt so safe, so routine. But that feeling of safety was a lie. The whole nightmare started subtly, with a feeling of being watched and some strange, dark smudges on the siding of the house, just below my window. At first, I just thought it was dirt, a trick of the light, but the feeling of unease lingered, a small, cold knot in the pit of my stomach that I couldn't shake. The smudges started to get darker, more prominent, and I could swear they were getting higher up the wall each day. It was so gradual that I almost convinced myself I was imagining it. But my gut told me something was wrong. Then, one night, a massive storm rolled in. The kind of rain that lashes against the windows and the wind howls like a hungry wolf. I was in my room, trying to study, but the storm was making me jittery. My desk was right by the window, and I kept glancing over at the glass, seeing the blurry, distorted reflection of my room. The rain was running down the pane, washing the dark streaks on the siding, but I could still see them. I got up, pulled the curtains aside, and what I saw made my blood run cold. They weren't smudges anymore. They were footprints. They were undeniably human, but something was wrong with them. They were long and skinny, and the toes were splayed unnaturally wide, like some kind of lizard's foot. And they weren't just a few prints. They were a clear, wet trail of prints climbing straight up the siding of the house, all the way to my second-story window. My mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation, but there was no ladder, no trellis, nothing a normal person could use. I stumbled backward, my heart hammering against my ribs, and stared at the impossible sight, my entire world tilting on its axis. The storm outside seemed to get more violent, as if mirroring the chaos inside my head. The prints started to wash away with the rain, but the image was already burned into my mind. I was so scared I could barely breathe that I ran downstairs, my heart pounding, and found my dad watching TV. He saw the terror on my face and immediately grabbed a flashlight. By the time we got outside, the prints were almost gone, just faint, dark streaks running up the wall. He tried to tell me it was a prank, but I saw the look in his eyes. He didn't believe it either. The next morning, he came home with a small, motion-activated security camera and spent the afternoon mounting it under the eaves, right below my window. He said it was to prove it was just some kid, and that would be the end of it. But I had a feeling we weren't going to find a kid. That night, I couldn't sleep, just lying there, listening to every creak the house made. The thought of what had been on my wall an icy weight in the pit of my stomach. The next morning, I was jolted awake by my dad's panicked shout from downstairs. I ran down to find him at the kitchen table, a small laptop in front of him. He pressed play, and the grainy, black and white footage of the side of our house filled the screen. For a long time, nothing happened. Then, at exactly 3:12 a.m., it emerged from the shadows. It was a gaunt, impossibly thin figure with long, gangly limbs that moved with an unnatural fluidity. It wasn't human. It glided over to the wall and, with a horrifying ease, began to climb, its elongated fingers and toes finding purchase on the smallest grooves in the siding. It was like watching a spider ascend, but in a human form, and my dad and I were completely silent, mesmerized and horrified that IT stopped just below my window, its dark, emaciated form silhouetted against the night. It stayed there for a moment, absolutely still, and then it slowly tilted its head, as if it could see me through the screen. Then, it pressed its face against the glass of my window. The image was blurry, but I could make out the gaunt, hollow-eyed face. But the thing that truly got me, that made my blood turn to ice, was its mouth. It was twisted into a grotesque, impossibly wide smile, a knowing, predatory grin. In the faint, distorted reflection on the glass, I could see its face, and I swear on everything I hold dear, it was smiling right at me, as if it knew I was in that room, sleeping, or trying to. It knew I was afraid that IT stayed like that for what felt like an eternity. Its face pressed against the glass. That horrifying smile burned into my memory. Then, just as slowly and deliberately as it had come, it began to climb back down the wall, its limbs moving with that same eerie, liquid grace. It got to the ground and vanished into the shadows as quickly as it had appeared. The camera feed glitched, freezing for several long, agonizing seconds on that distorted grin before cutting out completely. My dad and I just sat there in stunned silence. The video a proof, an undeniable, terrifying proof that what I had seen was real. We watched the video a few more times, hoping to find something we missed, something that would make sense, but it was always the same. That was it. My dad, a man of logic and reason, was completely undone. He just told me to pack a bag, and we drove to my aunt's place in the next town over without a word. We stayed there for a week, but the fear followed us. I couldn't sleep, and every night, I'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, and my mind would wander back to that face, that smile. It felt like it was watching me, even from a different house. The air felt heavy, oppressive, like I was constantly being observed. My dad, ever the pragmatist, was convinced we couldn't just run forever. He said we had to figure out a way to make our house feel safe again, and that we needed to face this thing head-on. With a heavy heart, we went back home. The house felt like a cage, a place where a monster knew where to find me. The first thing my dad did was install a whole new security system, with cameras all around the house, motion-activated lights, and an alarm. He even had a contractor replace the siding under my window. That night, I went to bed, filled with a sense of dread I hadn't felt since that rainy night. I must have drifted off at some point, because I was jolted awake by a low, guttural humming coming from outside my window. I froze, my heart leaping into my throat. The humming got louder, more insistent, and I could feel the vibrations through the wall. I slowly reached for my phone, my hand trembling, and opened the camera app. The feed from the camera under my window was black, a weird, distorted static on the screen. It was back. The humming stopped, replaced by a scraping sound coming from inside my closet. I whipped my head around to see a dark shape in the crack of the closet door. The door creaked open, and a pale, impossibly thin finger started to emerge from the darkness. It was followed by a whole hand, then an arm, and then the gaunt, emaciated figure from the video started to slither out of my closet, its body bending and twisting in ways that made me feel sick to my stomach. It was in my room. The humming started again, but this time, it was coming from inside, filling my ears and my head until I thought my skull would crack open. It took a step towards me, its movements so fluid and unnatural that it felt like it was floating. It was a predator, and I was its prey. That I finally found my voice, and I let out a blood-curdling scream that echoed through the house. The figure froze, its smile widening impossibly, as if my fear was a delicious treat. The humming stopped, and just as it started to take another step towards me, I heard a loud crash from downstairs. My dad. He must have heard me scream. The creature's head snapped towards the sound, and then, with a speed that was almost too fast for my eyes to follow, it turned and slithered back into the darkness of my closet, the door closing behind it with a soft, final click. My dad burst into the room with a baseball bat, his eyes wide with a combination of terror and rage. He took one look at my pale, trembling face and the static on my phone screen, and he knew. He knew I hadn't imagined it. That day was a blur. We didn't talk much about it. What was there to say? My dad spent the whole night on his computer, researching old folklore and ancient rituals. He found an obscure tale about a shadow lurker, a creature that feeds on fear and uses doors as gateways. And he found an old tale that mentioned a specific, rare herb that was said to repel it. He was gone the next morning, but he came back that evening with a small, crumpled bundle of leaves. He crushed them, their minty scent filling the air, and he started to chant, a low, rhythmic incantation. He walked through the whole house, spreading the scent everywhere. The screaming outside grew louder, more enraged, but it stayed outside. He finished the chant in my room, and the house went completely silent. We never saw the footprints again. The humming was gone. The static on the cameras went away. My dad, bless his heart, still keeps a small pouch of those dried-up leaves in his nightstand drawer, just in case. We may never understand what happened, but we dealt with it. And that, he says, is all that matters.